Hey, man, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Good, buddy. Thanks for calling.
I had 45 minutes to spare, so I'm giving you 30.
I'll take it. Thanks for checking in on the Crushing Iron podcast.
My pleasure.
All right, man. So we came up with what I think is a good idea. I thought we would get in because there's obviously a lot of first timers and a lot of people that are just getting started in triathlon and all kinds of stuff like that. So I thought maybe we'd go back and look at our first race and the training for it and whatever, and talk about maybe some of the things we thought we did wrong, and maybe we changed.
I like it. Yeah.
Cool. So I mean, it could be in the race or obviously. Yeah, I mean, it's not like we regret it or anything like that, but it's just, obviously you learn things along the way, and, some things, we may have done really well and didn't even realize it or whatever, but, so let's talk about, what was your first Ironman?
Man, when you shot me a text about the topics for today, I had to kind of do a stroll down memory lane. I think it was 2000, I want to say 2010 or 2011, I think, and I'm going to look it up online as we're talking about it, but I believe it was 2010 or 11. We'll say 2011, and it was Ironman, Florida.
Oh, okay, so you remember which one, you just can't remember the year exactly.
Yeah, Ironman, Florida was the first one.
Yeah, no. You've done so many, I've done.
The first one just didn't, it is what it is. No, I'm pretty sure it was, oh man, looking at the archives, they don't even go back that far. How lame is that? That's when you feel old. When you look up your first one at Ironman Florida and they don't even have it. That's ridiculous.
That is pretty bad. There's got to be something out there somewhere. No?
I'm sure it's out there somewhere. So it was based on what I'm looking at. It was 2010 because I did Arizona in 11. And that's my current PR. So, yeah.
Okay, 2010 in Florida. And, I just, something popped in my head as a general launching point. I think one of the, I don't even want to call it a mistake really, but one of the things I remember is because you never do anything really close to that distance on that day, there's obviously that anxiety about just being able to finish. And one thing that was, deep in my mind, I remember sitting in the water waiting for that gun to start going, man, I don't even know if I can do this. I mean, I haven't really even swam this far that much, even, something like that. And in retrospect, I think it was probably smart maybe to have that fear in the back of my mind, but also it may have created a little extra anxiety for me and maybe wasn't the best thing. So I think, kind of just generally having confidence in the workouts and the training leading up to it, even though you've never gone that far. I think that that's a big thing that I think a lot of people have to deal with and work on. And, confidence goes a long way. It's not cockiness. It's just understanding that you really have gone out there and done what you need to do to make that kind of thing happen.
Yep, totally agree. I remember when I was training for this one, I had actually just gone back to school. And I remember I did like a lot of my long runs on the treadmill, scrolling through note cards. I went to best school for physical therapy at the time, and I was taking like kinesiology and A&P and chemistry and all that stuff, and just memorizing stuff. And so I was doing note cards. But I think my first. Man, I think Ironman number one was I want to say 1420 was my Ironman Florida time. I did go into that race totally naive in a lot of areas. I was still pretty comfortable with the mass start. It was a 2-loop and still is a 2-loop course. The bike, I was totally naive. And was like, you know what? I'm not going to get a flat tire. I'm not even going to take anything with me. Well, around mile 45, I got a flat tire.
Oh,
and
no.
I had to. Oh yeah, yep. So I had to wait like 30 or 40 minutes for one of the little SAG vehicles to come by, um, and help me change that. So there's mistake one. Mistake two, I would say, is I rented a disc wheel, like that was going to help me when I was like struggling to average like 18 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So when it was windy, that kind of hurt me because I wasn't able to necessarily control it.
But you look kind of cool, or maybe not.
You look fast, but I mean, in triathlon, everybody looks fast. I mean, I think I still do it to this day, man. I'll line up with my age group, and I'm looking at him like, man, that guy looks like he should be a pro. You know, no body fat, looks mean, like all the high price gear, and then he like takes a couple warm up swim strokes, and I'm like ready to go all Baywatch and go save him because I think he's gonna die. So looks are very deceiving, but part of one of the bigger parts of the sport is looking fast. But I remember I used the old like Endurance Nation stock like 20-week plan, which I think is fine. I mean, for a first timer, I do think there's a lot of areas you could definitely do differently. And I mean, I went from a 14, like 10 or 20 in 2010 to a 10:30 2 years later.
Wow.
I got a coach and I trained totally differently, and but I think the first one you just do whatever you think it's gonna take to get the medal. At least for me at that point, that's what I did. I was like, if I can get off the bike, because even after my bike split was like a 7-hour bike split, I swam like an hour 5, I think, and I was like, I'm done. I remember sitting in T2, and I was like smiling and grinning like ear to ear, because I was like, I'm gonna be an Ironman.
After the swim?
No, in T2. After
T2,
I got off the bike. Yeah, I mean, I swam a 105, and my bike had been like 7+ hours. But so cumulative race time, I'm looking at like 8:15 with transition. So I had like 7-8 hours to walk or run a marathon to get to finish, and I was going to get that feeling. So I knew in T2, it was it. All I had to do was get through the marathon. However it needed to be, and so. Definitely a different approach to where I have now, but man, I think almost everything differently, training wise now than I did then.
I think there's a point to make right there, because you just said you got off the bike and knew that you had it, and I think a lot of people feel that if they have enough time. So that goes back to what we always talk about, is like, while the run is extremely important, to get those really good times, if you're just starting, I think, because the anxiety portion is the swim and the bike. I mean, those are loads higher for most people. So that may be a good lesson that, first timers want to pay attention to, is really spend a lot of time with the bike and the swim, just to, to create that. If there's fear that you may not finish, if you have that fear, to be able to go out strong in the swim and put out a solid bike and know you have the time to get done and do a walk run. Because I mean, let's face it, there's I don't know what the percentages are, but most people probably walk run the Ironman marathon to some degree. I'm not saying.
What's your definition of like walk run?
Well, I mean, just sprinkling in walks, I don't mean like.
Well, I would say if 2,000 people do it, start the race, that make it to make it to the marathon portion, I bet you of those 2,000, less than 50 actually run the whole thing without walking.
Oh, so there you go. I mean, I wasn't necessarily counting aid stations, but strategically kind of trying to break it down with some walking and what have you. Yeah, so again, that bike thing is like a major deal, and I had an advantage. I mean, and this goes back to our last podcast about coaching. I mean, you were with me all the way. I had you and Jim and a couple other people that had done them, and all along the way, while you weren't underplaying the toughness of finishing, you were building my confidence. And I did probably have that instilled in me a lot more than people that don't have a coach or somebody around them that's been through it.
Yeah.
That understands it. And, the more you understand that, the more you believe in it. And belief is such a huge part of this process.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah. So regarding the, you mentioned you had a flat and you didn't bring a kit with you, which is like, I can't imagine many people do that. But.
I mean, what an idiot. What an idiot. I just found it on Athlinks. It was actually 2009. So I looked up on Athlinks. It didn't even. It turned out to be like a 1351. But yeah, I didn't take a flat kit. I was like, yeah, what are the chances?
Yeah.
What are the chances? And I had done a half. My first 70.3 all on the same course I did the Gulf Coast Triathlon. Which is now Gulf Coast 70.3 or whatever, and that was my first half distance, and I made another huge mistake in that. I went like no socks on the half marathon for the portion for the first time ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking down at like mile like 8 or like maybe 7 or 8 and being like, man, because my feet were they were on fire. I knew I had blisters, and I remember looking down and thinking like, I don't remember these shoes having like a red streak down the back. Well, when I finished, oh dude, I bled through my shoes, like blood stained. My Brooks Adrenaline blood stained them. I was like out of commission for like 2 or 3 weeks with these blisters. Oh yeah, I was so concerned with like the finish and doing the Ironman or the 7.3 that I just didn't even take into consideration all the small things that were so important, that all the details that matter, that ultimately can make or break a race for you.
Yeah. In a bit of I don't know if it's irony or not coincidence, but regarding the flats, like that was my biggest fear. Okay, so in kind of a strange twist, I was like extremely worried about that, but my big mistake was I didn't spend hardly any time changing flats or even learning how to do that. I knew how to do it, but I was worried because I thought I would really kind of like flip out if it happened, and I would really panic and and so whatever. So I brought like 3 tubes. I really did. I was like, I think I had one in my kit, and then I had 2 in bottles or who knows what else, but I had like 8 CO2s. Man, I was just like super paranoid about some kind of flat situation. So, but my mistake on that was just not practicing it enough, to have it out of your head, because that's what really anxiety and things like that are having a problem or a fear about something and not addressing it and moving on from it with a solution.
Yeah.
And I didn't have it. I think on the what did you make any mistakes? You're a solid swimmer, so you probably didn't really make any mistakes on the swim or anything like that.
Yeah, that's kind of the one area I rarely ever make a mistake. Yeah, I do remember one year, since we're kind of going back and forth and kind of making it a what have you done wrong in triathlon. I remember Gulf Coast again. It was a race of like 5 years in a row. It was so choppy and so windy. I remember on coming back in, it's actually a counterclockwise swim, which means if you breathe to the left, then you can see the buoys. If not, you're just kind of sighting on your own. And I remember, and they always place the kayaks like a certain distance from the buoys to make sure you don't drift too far off course. Well, they usually keep the kayakers like 10 to 15 meters from the buoy line to make sure they kind of keep you corralled. And at this point, the current was so strong, I was sighting off the kayaks coming back in, just knowing I can stay in the window. And what turns out, the current had been so strong that the kayaks have been pushed like 50 meters down. Wow. And so I ended up coming out of the water like 80 to 100 meters down the beach from where the exit was. I still had a decent time, but I was like, oh, I guess I should have at least like at some point popped up and taken a gander, but
wow.
I didn't.
So you had a little sand run to end it?
Yeah, man, just soaking up the glory. You don't. I got to freshen up a little bit because when you come out of the water with your wetsuit and your swim cap and your goggles, you kind of look like you're coming out of the birth canal. And your face is all red and your eyes are scrunched up and your eyes are bloodshot. So I had a good 100-meter little saunter to kind of freshen up and get my wetsuit down, and then run through the arch and back up towards transition.
Yeah, and while we're at it, if people out there listening have mistakes that they think people can learn from or whatever, hit us on the Crushing Iron Facebook group, or email us at crushingiron@gmail, and we can kind of get that dialogue going, because I think that's again a huge thing, is like learning from mistakes and solving the problem and getting that out of your head as any kind of distraction or anything like that. I don't know. My first Ironman swim was, of course, Wisconsin. It was a mass start, and you had us trained up to not fear contact or any of that at all, and that was not a problem whatsoever. Again, I don't know if it's necessarily a mistake, but regarding the time that I was in the back of my mind wishing for, I went out. I don't know. I wasn't confident enough in my swim to go out fast enough to get away from the masses. And that really, it's one of those things where it may be a little bit harder out of the gate if you kind of feel good and push it just a ways to get out in front of that pack. But if you don't, it creates a massive contact energy drain. So it's kind of a catch-22 in a way, that you're going to want to get out there, at least for me, and I've done it twice now, so I know both times I've kind of done the same thing, but had a decent swim, so it wasn't awful. But in order to get in to transition with the time you want, a lot of times you almost have to sacrifice a little bit. And I know you say you don't want to go out too hard, but there's a fine line of going out with a little bit of aggression to get in front and get some clear water. And
yeah, I mean, if you're prepared for it, to hold that kind of tempo, I think it's a definite plus. If you're not, then it's simply something you have to take into consideration, and during your training. I think that's the biggest difference.
Which brings up a great point. So, like, as a coach, would you then, in say Madison, in a mass start, see what I think maybe ultimately became my problem is that I tried to swim too close to the line. If I'm going to go out slow, if I know that my swim is going to be in the middle of the pack or whatever, it may be better for me just to stay wide. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Would you suggest that, or is that just creating extra distance that...
Yeah, I would definitely choose the shortest, the straightest line versus avoiding contact, because I mean you're still going to have contact, and you have to, and plus I think that if you're within the majority of people, you're more than likely going the right way. And you can't really get too off course, because there's going to be somebody like 5 feet to the right and 5 feet to the left. So you're kind of like, swapping paint per se. You're all going the same direction, but you kind of take the walls and the car out and other cars out, and you're like, oh, I better really pay attention and sight even more to make sure that I'm not like going off course and swimming farther already.
Now, moving on to the bike, I think the one thing that it's possible I did wrong, and I had a decent bike up there, right around 6 hours, and I felt pretty good about it. And I think possibly, though, I remember the last 20 to 30 miles being really, really hard. And I don't know if this is remedied by, kind of starting a little more under control, because I'm sure I was amped up, and I remember my first 30 miles were kind of cooking a little bit, and I think I may have left a lot, or may have left a lot of energy behind me up there, and I don't know if that's even possible too, because it's like did I train to a level where even a 112 mile bike was going to be manageable, period. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on something like that.
It's with such a long race, I think you're always going to end up questioning something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just the only times you can like maybe not question it as much, but you're still going to question it, is the more you train, the more experience you get, and the more data you can collect, and then just race experience. Like, you're making the right decisions, because the day is just full of decisions, and it's do I go hard? Do I go soft? Do I take this hill or do I coast it? Do I charge this hill on the run or do I walk it? There's so many. Do I walk this aid station? Do I run it?
Mm-hmm.
There's just so many things to think about, and hindsight's always 20/20, and you'll never know. And you always assume if you make a different decision, it's going to result in a faster time, which is not the case, because you just don't know. But it's always fun, But there's always that but. Well, I was 4 whatever hours and 15 minutes for my 70.3. It was a good race, but I could have done this.
Yeah.
Well, you could have, but you didn't. And even if you had of, who knows what the result would have been?
Right.
You just never know. And that's why I think that the best at the pointy end of the age group and obviously the top tier pros, they are so cerebral, and they are so intelligent, and they critically think about every aspect of their race, and they just make great decisions.
Yeah.
Are they patient enough to not leave it on a certain part of the course? Can they check their ego? Do they know their training? Do they, it's just more and more information and more experience. It leads to more knowledge, and then which more knowledge and more experience ultimately you would think leads to better decision making.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and ultimately, and a lot of this had to do with you and some of the guys I was training with, but ultimately I think really my decision making was really solid in that first race, and a big part of that happened because my swim was about 10 to 15 minutes slower than I hoped. So I had this insane goal that I didn't really tell anybody about, but I was thinking in my head that my first one could be around 11 hours or sub 11.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got out of the water, I knew that was blown up, and that made me kind of just focus on sub 12 because it was my first one, and I thought, well, that would be a heck of a accomplishment. So
yeah.
I really think that if I would have come out of that water faster, it could have really destroyed everything, And you're always big on patience, and rightfully so. It kind of just played its way into my race, and then ultimately it just came down to making the decision not to walk on the marathon. And that really, I think, is a decision.
It's one you got to buy into before you start. I mean, you have to fully buy into it. It's not really one you can decide like at mile 13 because at that point you're already thinking of walking because it's going to feel so good. I remember it wasn't Wisconsin last year. I think it was maybe Louisville a couple of years ago, and I was running really well, and the aid station got so jam-packed that I had to stop and walk. And as soon as I did, I was like, oh man, this is so nice.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't have stopped and walked.
Yeah.
Could I have ran the whole? It's just that. It's like, man, I got to take a leak, and you got to hold it for 2 hours, and you finally get to the urinal, and you're like, this is great. But how much longer could I have held it? Could I have held it for another 3 hours, or could I not held it for another 3 hours?
You never know. I mean, my caveat is I did walk aid stations, so I should say that. I mean, I didn't, but I had that as a goal, and I think it was because Corey had planted that in my head, and he had a really nice Louisville race a couple weeks beforehand, and he said he walked the aid stations, and that was all relative because I didn't like walk the entire aid station. I just stopped and walked while I was drinking and maybe eating, and then it was I don't know, in some ways it makes it a little harder because you gotta keep starting up again, and it wasn't easy, but I think it sometimes for your first one it is easier because for me, I was just at all costs ready to put a certain number on the board, and it was not pretty and it was very painful, but but every time you walk it gets harder to run again. So
lots of pros walk at Kona that win. I mean, Ferdinand, he walks aid stations. I saw Tim Reed, who won 70.3 Worlds this last year. He raced again this last weekend, won and walked some aid stations. It's like if they see the benefit, why don't we? What do they know that we don't? And so it's obviously not a sign of weakness. It might be a sign of intelligence and confidence. Vice versa. So it's definitely interesting dynamic.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, and true, even though it is harder sometimes to get started, but it's amazing what a 20-30 second walk can do to rejuvenate your legs because you're using the same exact motion over and over and over, and then all of a sudden you walk for a minute and it's kind of like lets everything kind of cool down, and your walking is different than running, obviously, so it just changes things up a little bit, and I don't know, that you're right. Why not? If the pros are doing it, they must know something, and it's such a long day, man.
Yeah. So many decisions and so many things you can always question yourself. But usually, the more patient and the more patient-minded person will always win. The one that sticks to their plan, and if and is patient and takes things a little more conservative than jumping the gun, usually I think it's going to end up a little bit better.
Yeah, chasing the age group numbers on the calves is probably not a good plan.
Probably not a good plan. Probably not a good plan.
Come on, I know you've done it.
Of course I've done it. I made like every mistake you can possibly imagine, in training or in racing. That's been doing this for like 10-something years. I've made all the mistakes, and that's why I love coaching, is because I can make sure that people that I coach, when they do take on their first one, that they don't overlook the same mistakes that I did. And whether regardless of the distance, and pass on little tricks of the trade and things I've learned over the time. But yeah, I make all the mistakes first, and I just try to pass along what I know and my knowledge and experience and data to make sure you guys don't suck as bad as I do when I started.
Yeah,
you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You did a lot of that for me, I know.
I did before we even met. I was churning out like super slow 70.3s and full distances just so I could gather intel from Mike Terrali in 2013. I mean, I knew it all had a plan. It came to me in the night.
I really did. You're going to
meet this man in his early 50s with a black leather jacket. He's going to roll up on a motorcycle on a cold December day in Nashville, and you're going to share a rotisserie chicken with 2 sides, sweet potato and rice, and at that point on, you'll know that all this was worth it. Yeah. All the suffering, all the bad training days, all the mistakes you made, it's all worth it. Yeah, and it came to pass.
That had to be a hell of a day for you. It was like everything came together. All your hard work.
It was. It all came together. All the hard work, and I look back on it and I'm thinking, man, at least I still like a few of those guys. I got some good stuff out of there, but no, it's always a good experience.
Yeah. So, overall, in general, I think, and this is sort of one of your backbone theories, is that one of the biggest mistakes you can make is just being impatient and going outside of your plan. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, or sometimes don't even have I think people oftentimes confuse a plan with an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest difference is, I say this to, certain people these days is, expectations are usually just future resentments. They're you're either going to hate what you had to sacrifice or get to it, or you're going to hate the fact that you didn't get the expectation and you set it too far out and you set yourself up for failure and you beat yourself up for not doing it again. But having a plan is different. I'm going to stick to playing conservative. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to go by feel. I'm going to take what the day gives me. Which I think for me was a great example. I think one of my best executed races outside of Arizona in 2011 was Louisville in 2013, when I had barely trained at all, that compared to what I usually do. I didn't get my bike until May and started training, and it was that last year that you and I did it where it was 100 degrees, and so I didn't have a plan. My only plan was to outsmart as many people as I could and be more patient than anybody else. So that was the only way I was going to be able to have a decent race and climb my way up the overall ranking.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up with my best overall ranking, I was top 180 or something that I had up to that point. And so with half the training that I usually do, I just chose to be smarter, because I knew that fitness wise and athletically wise, I was going to be, behind that 8 ball.
Yeah. And we can wrap up here pretty quick, but I wanted to get into, one of the things you did for me that I thought was, well, first of all, it was unexpected. And secondly, I thought it was really cool was I think it was maybe 2 days before the race, and you had been planning this out, No, not that. No, I'm not even going to say that. No,
that's one of my greatest coups ever.
Yeah,
Visit, but yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, you had you'd been training with us and me all along, and then that story is basically about 3 weeks before you said you weren't even going to come to the race, and I was just like, what the? I was just furious, and then all along you had planned on just surprising us, and that was really awesome because it just mattered, it really mattered to have you there, and I just
I even pulled a fake photo.
Yeah,
do you remember? Because I had an athlete competing at 70.3 Worlds the same weekend, and I remember I pulled a picture off of her that she had sent me. Her and another one of my athletes were doing it, and yeah.
Yeah, so I thought you were.
I did well.
I was like, why would he go to that instead of this? I don't know. It was just weird. But then we showed up at dinner 2 nights before, and you're sitting there, and I was like, wow, that was amazing. But I can't remember if that's when you gave it to us or not. But the race day plan, which is very detailed, but not very detailed. Well, it was pretty specific as far as how to handle each event and things like how to go out on the bike, and you had broken it out based on the course, in which you had trained us for Wisconsin all year based on our trainer rides and big gears, and we rode out at Natchez Trace, and we specifically trained for that course, and it didn't really dawn on me until late in the training, but you were specifically working us, and that's a lot of the contact, open water swimming, everything was geared right at Wisconsin. But that plan you gave me for the race day really was like a cemented reminder of how to handle it and how to be patient and how to deal with the actual race. And I thought it was a huge advantage for me because I wasn't, I had sort of a loose plan in my head, but you broke it out and made it a lot simpler. And while I wouldn't say I nailed it to the T, I think it was in my head, and I really think that made a big advantage. It's like when we were in training for the course, for example, that one time when we decided to simulate Louisville, and ride 15 miles or whatever flat out to
rode from NRC which was a great idea, except for the last 10 miles where we almost died. But
Yeah.
other than that, it was a brilliant idea.
We had to deal with a lot of car issues on that. But so we rode out and then basically rode, quote unquote, a hilly midsection and then came back down the stick. And it was just a real simulated preview of what we were going to face at Louisville. So I thought that was really cool. And there's a lot of stuff in there that really helped me, especially with that Wisconsin training plan about how to handle the back, certain hilly sections and what, I don't know. So I think we kind of got off the rails there a little bit, but
that's all right. It's all good information.
I hope so.
Yeah, I think next podcast we need to cover a little bit of that article I sent you.
Oh, the running?
Yeah, you haven't read it yet, have you? Don't lie.
No, I did. I wrote it. I rewrote it. I rewrote it.
Oh, already plagiarizing. Jesus, man.
I'm about to post that thing verbatim on Crushing Iron and take the whole strategy. But no, I love that. It was really intriguing. I read. I know.
Read a book, something like.
I did, but I read through a bunch of it, and then I was like, man, I don't like reading on phones, so I'm gonna have to send that to myself and read it on the big screen because I'm old. So, but in general, I told you I got the gist of it, and I was really digging it. So it was a cool way to look at running, I thought, and I don't know how you felt about it though.
No, yeah, it's the kind of approach that I went with last year that yielded me such really good running results. And it'll be. I love that. We'll definitely touch on that from the next podcast. But part of the podcast and kind of incorporating with that article is why I think that Garmin Connect and Strava and like posting your workouts to Facebook is actually ruining people's and delaying people's run fitness.
Ooh.
And why your daily posts on Strava and updating every workout you do is actually hurting you versus helping you.
I like it.
In the TV biz, we call that a teaser.
Yeah, that is a great tease, man.
Thanks.
That was what I did for years, and you just.
I know it is. Back in your heyday, you could have used that. I'm kind of a nat.
Yeah.
Now, you know me. I have an infatuation with the TV and the news. So
absolutely.
You can use it as a teaser.
Yeah. It's a deal, man. Well, hang on a second after this, and but for now, we'll get into that next time. I guess we'll get into running.
Yep.
And some new theories maybe for some people. It certainly was for me. And
new theories,
but old.
Yeah, oldies but goodies.
Time tested.
That's right. Time tested.
Great running theories that would just go right into Ironman and triathlon training beautifully. All right. So I'll catch you in a little while, man. I'll catch you.
Hold on tight.
All right. See you, man.